Hello. So today we shall discuss agrarian movements. You know, today we shall discuss about the agrarian movements because we have already Dalit movement, women movement, backward class movements. We have already discussed. I think today it will be the last class regarding this studies of movement, social movements, and politics in India. So, in today's class, we shall discuss agrarian movement, working class movement, fisher folk movement, environmental movement. Finally, we shall touch upon the concluding chapter, that is social movements and democracy and assessment. You see, different agrarian classes. You know what is agrarian? It is related to agriculture. So, agrarian movements mostly are agricultural movements, including the movements of the agrarian classes, which are related to agriculture in terms of working on the land and also its ownership. ମାନେ ଏଗ୍ରିକଲଚରାଲ ଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡରେ ଜଣେ କାମ କରୁଛନ୍ତି ଏବଂ ଯେଉଁମାନେ ବି ଓନ୍ କରିଛନ୍ତି, both of them they are involved in this particular process. So the issues taken up in the agrarian movement are generally economic, but in several cases the economic and social issues they overlap, and such cases include where the agrarian class is both an economic and social group. For example, in the case of the Dalits and women, the economic and social, they are also involved. For example, self-respect, dignity, gender-based discrimination, they are social issues. So far as agrarian society is concerned, it is not a homogeneous society. Agricultural society ମଧ୍ୟ ବିଭିନ୍ନ yardstick ନେଇକରି divide ହେଇଛି. It is divided on economic and social basis. And the mobilization of an agrarian group, it depends on the specific issues related to it. And we shall study this agrarian movement uh, or the movement of the agrarian classes under two broad perspectives, two broad frameworks. One is the non-Marxian perspective, the other one is the Marxian perspective. I mean, a perspective विषय में in the previous class we have some references. So far as the non-Marxian perspective is concerned, we have non-economic factors, say self-respect, dignity, caste, geographical zones, size of the land holdings to identify the agricultural classes, and the classes which belong to the low castes, they are usually identified as those belonging to the agricultural laborers, poor and small peasants. And those belonging to the high castes and middle castes, they are identified as belonging to the upper classes, like rich peasants or
Yes.
landlords. The advocates of the Martian class, they consider the non-Martian approach to unscientific, naturally, because they heavily depend on economic factor. The followers of the Martian approach consider the non-Martian approach to be unscientific, and they argue that a scientific way to differentiate peasantry is to see the proportion of family labor power in relation to the outside labor power in working on the land along with the ownership of the land. So for our convenience, we can find out various classes in the agrarian groups. For example, for our convenience, for the analysis, the rural poor, they're mostly agricultural laborers, small poor and marginal peasants, then also the farmers, middle peasants, kulaks, the rich peasants, the rural rich. That is another group. And these classes own land. And ଯୋଉମାନେ kulaks by rich farmers, they are also landowners. So the poor farmers, they are engaged in agriculture, but they do not own any agricultural land. Pre-independence ଆମେ ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟର ଆମର understanding ପାଇଁ that what was the trend and status of the movement before independence and what was the status and trend of the movement after independence. Now we shall touch upon the agrarian movements in the pre-independence period. Almost all the regions of our country, it has experienced agrarian movements during the pre-independence period, which is mostly known as peasant movements. And these movements, they involved all exploited classes like tenants, agricultural laborers, then artisans, and among these movements in the pre-independence period were the Oudh peasant movement in UP, Kheda movement in Gujarat, Mupila movement in Malabar, that is in Kerala, Champaran peasant movement in Bihar. Then also in West Bengal there is Wahebi movement, Tibabhag movement, and also in the Madras Presidency there is Telangana movement. These are some of the examples of the peasant movements before independence. When we shall compare the characteristics of these movements, I mean, prior to independence, ଆମର ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ପୂର୍ବରୁ जो एग्रीकल्चर मूवमेंट गुड़ा चलता आम जब पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस पीरियड रो मूवमेंट से तो कंपेयर करबा. हेलो, am I not audible? Hello, hello friends, am I not audible?
Hello, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Audible, sir. Audible.
Okay.
Audible, sir.
Okay. Thank you. So a comparison between the peasant movements of pre-independence period and post-independence period, we'll notice that there are differences in issues. There is also difference in the leadership, nature of the leadership, ideology, pattern of mobilization in the agrarian movement of these two phases, both pre and post-independent phases. Mostly in the pre-independence period, movements can be termed as anti-colonial movement. Because before our independence, before 1947, these peasant movements were against the classes which are supporters of the British Empire. And more or less, British, because they are rulers, they are being supported by the landowners. They are supported by the landlords, moneylenders. So the nature of the peasant movements prior to independence were mostly anti-colonial. Because the poor farmers, the laborers, agricultural laborers, they identified the landlords, the kulaks, the rich farmers with the British rule because they are the supporters of the British Raj. So the agrarian classes reacted to the exploited system in different ways. And the ways in which they reacted to the exploitative system, that was called by scholar James Scott everyday forms of resistance and in the forms of organized peasant movements. So before independence, the task before the leaders of this peasant movement was to organize the farmers, the poor farmers or the agricultural laborers against the landlords, the money lenders, and British administration. Because a landlord money by money lenders money, middleman money by British administration, bureaucracy, whatever it may be. They have exploited the poor farmers. So a general point which emerges from the large number of these studies is that the leadership of these movements, they came from the non-peasant classes. Next summary is a very interesting analysis that the peasant movements, they are organized and led by the non-peasant classes. So leadership was from the non-agricultural sector in most cases. For example, one of the authors, Kapil Kumar, he has written a book, Peasants in Revolt, Tenants, Landless, Congress and the Raj in Audh, which indicates that though the leadership of Audh peasants movement didn't belong to the peasants as such, it ran parallel to the leadership of the national movement. So most often what is really a very interesting study that the leadership of the peasant movement was running parallel to the leadership of the national movements. And religion, caste, nationalism, even Marxism provided ideological basis of the peasants during this phase. So, in nutshell, the peasant movements of the pre-independence period had impacted on the programs of the Indian National Congress. And the Congress socialist group within the Congress, which included later generation of socialists, communists, advocated the need for the drastic land reforms. Because demand for land reforms are directly related to agriculture. What about the movement's strength and nature in post-independence period? You know, there are certain developments in Indian political economy in the post-independent era. These are the policy measures introduced by the state during the 1950s, both at the national and provincial levels. And the demand was to bring about agricultural transformation and reform through measures like land reform, community development programs, and agricultural extension schemes. So, 2 decades of last century, the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 70s, April Dasandhari, the this particular period has witnessed movements of a section which is known by different names like farmers, middle peasants, kulaks, rich peasants, or rural rich. And these movements had their own organization and leadership. And these movements were mostly known like Bharatiya Kisan Union (BKU), which was led by Bhupinder Singh Mann in Punjab, and also there is another BKU led by Mahendra Singh Tikar in Uttar Pradesh. So there is one BKU in Punjab. The leader was Bhupinder Singh Mann, and also another Bharatiya Krishak Samaj in which was led by Mahendra Singh Tikar in Uttar Pradesh. And also in Maharashtra, there is an agricultural organization which is purging ahead the movements that is called Shatkari Sangathan, and the leader was Sarad Joshi in Maharashtra. And also there is one organization, Karnataka Rajya Rait Sangh, which was led by Professor Nanjan Daswami, and Khirat Samaj in Gujarat. So Khidut Samaj in Gujarat. So likewise, there are various types of agricultural organizations in different states of Indian Union. All these movements in different parts of our country, they share certain common characteristics. They emerged in prosperous regions of the country which have benefited from the Green Revolution. They are the movements of rural rich, which included rich peasants, landlords, self-cultivating middle peasants. Of the three movements, that is Sakari Sangathan in Maharashtra, Karnataka Rahita Sangha, and also Bharatiya Krishak Union, that is BKU movement in UP, they deserve such a special discussion. It was what is called Bharat versus India thesis of Sharad Joshi, who was the leader of this Satkari Sangathan in Maharashtra, which highlighted the rural-urban divide more prominently. You will also notice that Sharad Joshi is only leader who had supported the liberalization policy of the state and who also worked as the advisor to the government of India during the VP Singh's regime. So since farmers' movements are the post-Green Revolution movement and largely they occurred in the Green Revolution belt, they found the terms of trade against the agricultural sector. The rising cost of the input in agriculture could not be met with the returns of produce. And besides, the inability of the system to provide electricity, along with the increasing indebtedness to the public institution, mainly to meet the input and infrastructural requirement, gave a new type of problem. And what really happened in a particular phase, particularly during 1970s, people in general lost faith in politics, which to them meant formal political institutions, mainly leaders, political parties, and elections. Prior to BKU mobilization, that is Bharatiya Krishak Union mobilization in 1980s, the farmers of Uttar Pradesh, they were mobilized mainly by the leftist forces, like the socialists, the communists, but their mobilization mainly took place in the 1950s and the 1960s. Apart from the socialists and communists, you must have heard about Charan Singh, who also attempted to mobilize the farmers of UP during this period. He did not mobilize them into a collective action. His mobilization of farmers was in the form of coming out with an electoral base for himself among middle and backward caste peasants like Jats, Jadavs, Kurmis, Puris, loathe. And he did so while he was also still a member of Congress. And most Charan Singh definitely has a electoral motive because in following the defeat of Congress in 1967, after the fourth general election, Congress had a big defeat. And Charan Singh, who was previously was a member of Congress, but he came out of the Congress party to form his own party, that is BKD, Bharatiya Kranti Dal. So he gradually consolidated his base among middle caste peasants. Charan changed his focus to the state and national politics, which catapulted him to the post of prime minister in 1980. So, Vision movement formed a basis for him for a political career. The principal issue of the mobilization of the farmers was related to cane price, though other issues are also very much there. In UP particularly, there are problems of sugarcane growers, some of which exist in today. So mostly agrarian movement has taken up these issues of the farmers, particularly in UP, sugarcane growers and all that. And the problem for the farmers was compounded by the fact that the price of the sugarcane was not provided to the farmers on time. It was also not paid in full, it was paid in installments. So during 1950s and 60s, the major demand of these peasant movements, particularly in UP, it included regular, timely, and full payment of the price of the sugarcane to the cane growers. Then globalization, which has come during 1990s, it has also impacted the farmers movement. Unlike other earlier movements, those of the farmers in the era of globalization, the attempt of the Western countries, especially to interfere in the agrarian economy of our country, because this was done by the Western countries through Dunkel Draft. You must have heard about Dunkel Draft and GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. It evoked different reactions from the farmer movement. While Sharad Joshi from Maharashtra supported globalization, two other leaders, Professor Najuddin Swami of Karnataka and Mahendra Singh Tikait of Bharatiya Krishak Union in UP, they have opposed. So some of the leaders, they have supported globalization, they have welcomed it, but some of the leaders, they have opposed globalization. In fact, many leaders, they are opposed to multinational companies because the MNCs used Indian natural resources like water to manufacture soft drinks. In fact, intellectuals like Vandana Shiva, one of the environmentalists, he argued that modern technology popularized in green revolution has harmed the fertility of the land rather than helping it. And by that way, environmental hazards they have been unleashed. So these are more or less some discussion on important agrarian movements, revolutions in some parts of the countries and some states like UP, Karnataka, Punjab, then also Madras presidency during the time Telangana movement and also West Bengal, and also the nature and characteristics of the movement and leadership are different from one place to the other. And also the leaders have not unified approach to this impact of globalization. Some of the leaders they have welcomed it, some of them have criticized the impact of globalization on agricultural sector. Then going to the working class movements, because because it's a text on movement studies, more or less have touched upon many important movements, including the movement, backward movement, women movement, ethnic movement, and also have touched now about the agricultural or agrarian movements. Now we shall also briefly touch upon working class movements. Because working class movement बेसी martial literature रे बेसी prominence ना. But in case of modern working class, the concept arose in India, in our country, during 19th century. And essentially, working class concept after the establishment of the modern factories, railways, dockyards, construction activities. worker section धीरे धीरे आसले. तर factories ତିଆରି ହେଲା, railways ତିଆରି ହେଲା, dockyards ତିଆରି ହେଲା, shipping yards ତିଆରି ହେଲା, and many construction activities that have been coming up relating to roads and buildings. So it was a modern working class in the sense of relatively modern organized labor. Of course, there are certain exceptions. The plantation workers who also worked for the capitalist employers and produced goods which are sold in international markets, they were recruited and worked under unfree conditions. Majority of the workers in colonial India, the recruitment and working conditions were not as free as were present in some of the Western countries. And apart from the less developed economy, the colonial condition also had its bearing on the labor movement. So we have more or less a fair idea of what is termed to be a working class. Working class movement is a much broader phenomenon, and it covers all kinds of movements involving workers. It includes within its ambit silent protests, passive resistance, individual protests, strikes, and also organized forms of welfare activities and bigger protest strikes, reaching to the level of general strikes. It involves various kinds of reactions and responses of the workers to the industrial system. And labor movements includes various types of structures. The workers. That is why trade unions have come up. Worker class movement सबसे important role है trade union मानकर. The trade union movement also side by side came up. And the trade union movement, it accepts the industrial system as given, but attempts to make it more human, more amenable to the needs of the workers. Trade union माने धीरे धीरे सेमानकर objective होची how to develop and ameliorate the conditions of the workers, the working and the living condition. I mean the health condition both in the working place and also where they are living. The labor colonies, workers colonies and all that. Working class system टा आपण माने मोर जो माने कार्ल मार्क्स विषय पढी छि जानि इट्स ए मोस्टली a concomitant feature of the capitalistic economy. এবং 19th century traces of capitalism has entered into Indian system, and that is why during 19th century only this working class movements that become prominent in India. Because you know during the British Raj there are plantations, even they have introduced railways. Then also tea companies were established. For example, this company, Assam Tea Company, was established in 1839 to set up tea gardens in Assam. Coffee plantations were started in South India. Upon Kurd coffee plantations are there. That has all happened during 19th century British Raj. So the migration of the labor, transport and raw material and also manufactured goods within and outside the country, it became frequent. Port cities, कारण धरंतु raw material में हो बा finished goods कहीं हो, search of markets to bring in raw material wherever required and also try to find out or search markets for finished goods or to send the finished goods both within the country and also outside. Ports have been also constructed. So there are port cities like Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. You know, British a port city बेसी important है. They have become the center of capitalistic economy. Kolkata, Madras and Mumbai. Bombay port cities. Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. So they have become the centers of capitalistic economy. Naturally. Dockyards, they have been constructed. Cotton mills in Bombay, jute mills in Calcutta, and several factories in Madras they are set up in the late 19th century. Worker section टा कहीं के आसिला. हमें जानते India mostly is one agricultural economy, but this working class gradually has entered because of this industrialization during the British Raj. Factories have come up. Jute mills in Calcutta, cotton mills in Bombay, factories in Madras. And also many industrial cities have come up. And industries they have been set up in Ahmedabad, Kanpur, Solapur, Nagpur, like that. So even before the emergence of the trade unions, trade union movement विशेषकर First World War पर आसी. 1914 ରୁ 18 First World War ହେଲା, and the world has seen this particular emergence of the trade unions. But even before the emergence of trade unions, after the First World War, there have been various forms of labor movements and protest against low wage. Sporadic भाव में अनेक जगह वर्कर मूवमेंट थिला. ट्रेड यूनियन आसला परे वर्कर मूवमेंट को धीरे धीरे स्पीयर हेड हैला बास ताको प्रॉपर डायरेक्शन मिलिला. किंतु ट्रेड यूनियन एस्टैब्लिश होबा पूर्व मध्य वर्कर प्रोटेस्ट वाज वेरी मच देयर. So most often you can see that trade unions can be seen as the result of these earlier labor struggles. The workers in the cotton and jute industries, in the railways, they are more in the public gaze. And the early social workers, the philanthropists, they are also involved with them. The workers are slowly learning to protest and combine for the redress of their grievances. They gradually have become conscious, educated, and they fought for grievance redressal. And during the war years, which allowed the industrialists to make huge profits, while the workers' real was declined. Marxist principle operates during the war years when there are huge profits for the industrialists. The workers' real wage was really declining. And the gap between the workers and the industrialists, it widens. So many people, many leaders, many organizations, they have come up to give direction and essential strength to these workers' movements in different parts of the country. For example, in Bengal, Shashipad Banerjee initiated welfare activities among the workers. He tried to educate them and to voice their grievances. He founded Working Men's Club in 1870. You see, 1870. And also, there is Working Men's Mission, which was established by Brahmo Samaj in Bengal. And also, some other important organizations, and they have become very active among the Bombay workers. For example, Bombay Mill Hands Defense Association, which was founded by Bal Gangadhar Tilak in 1908, and Kamagar Hitwardhak Sabha, which was formed in 1909. The Social Service League, which was established in organizations who have come up with welfare activities for the workers. So that the task is to educate the workers, to make them conscious, and to fight for their demands. So gradually, in our country, there is emergence and growth of trade unions. Some of the important trade unions like All India Trade Union Congress, then also RTUC, and also UTUC. These are the most important trade unions of our country. In 1920, the All India Trade Union Congress was formed. And many people connected with labor realized that there is need for the central organization of labor, because by that way only throughout the country, the work of the trade unions can be coordinated. So AITUC, that is All India Trade Union Congress, had this centralizing role to coordinate the activities of various trade unions all over the country. And Lala Lajpat Rai became the first president of AITUC. In political terms, the most important phenomenon in the field of labor movement in our country was the emergence of communists, communistic ideology. Because they're inspired by the Marxian ideology. ମାନେ କମ୍ୟୁନିଷ୍ଟ ମ୍ୟାନିଫେଷ୍ଟୋ ପଢିଛନ୍ତି, ଦାସ କ୍ୟାପିଟାଲ ପଢିଛନ୍ତି. What was the call of the Marxist ideology? Marx's slogan କଣ ଥିଲା? Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. You are like bonded laborers. You are under the dictates of the bourgeois. Now it's time that you unite. If you unite, only then you can win because you have nothing to lose. So the communists, they have been inspired from the philosophy of Marx and Lenin. The Communist Party of India was formed abroad in Soviet Union in October 1920. And M.N. Roy was the moving force behind this soon after the formation of the CPI. The communists became active in the labor movements in our country, in Bombay and Calcutta. And they have invited their particular attention due to the labor concentration, because labor concentration was very much high in Calcutta, Bombay, Madras, etc. All these centers of capitalistic economy. So labor problems are very much there in these particular cities. So the communists, they organized the workers in cotton mills of Bombay, jute mills of Calcutta. And এই সিটি গুড়াকরে যদি বেশি ফ্যাক্টরিজ রহিলা, কারণ মার্সিয়ান আইডিওলজি should operate only in the industrial belt. Of course, ଆପଣ ଯୋଉମାନେ ସବୁ ମାର୍କ୍ସ ଫିଲୋସଫିର କ୍ରିଟିସିଜମ ବି ପଢିଛନ୍ତି, one of the biggest challenges to this Marxism was that as Marx has deciphered, Marxism could not be successful in industrial countries, industrially developed countries. Communism was successful in agricultural economy like Russia. Russia रे प्रथम करी communist regime ହେଲା. କିନ୍ତୁ industrial countries ମାନେ करे communistic regime ହେଇ नथला. But whatever it may be, workers are found in factories and industries in big cities. So communists organized the workers in cotton mills of Bombay and mills of Calcutta. So AITUC definitely has a very pivotal role in mitigating the suffering of the workers in our country. The 10th session of AITUC was held in Nagpur, and Jawaharlal Nehru was the president of that particular AITUC. In that session, the communists were able to pass resolution calling for the boycott of the Royal Commission on Labor. And also, they demand dissociation from the ILO, International Labour Organization. They want to dissociate themselves. The moderate and reformist groups also, they have come up within the AITUC, led by N.M. Joshi, Diwan Chamanlal, Venkatgiri Brahagiri, V.V. Giri, who became later on the president, and also B.C. Bara. So AITUC ভিতরে মধ্যে leadership রে ধীরে ধীরে মধ্যে তাଙ୍କ ভিতরে অন্তর্দ্বন্দ্ব আসিলা. Again, another split also occurred in 1931 because of the difference between or the divergence between nationalist and the communist opinion. But whatever it may be, AITUC definitely has played a very pivotal role so far as the trade union movements in India is concerned. There are divisions, various types of political affiliations. In the post-war period, when the controls national government, it was becoming apparent. The political rivalry within the trade unions became more acute. The Congress, was the dominant party by that time. It tried to influence the AITUC and its union to work among the Gandhian lines and in support of the Congress. But by then, the communists' influence had grown very strong. Congress धीरे धीरे फॉल आउट करिगला एंड कांग्रेस पार्टी कान देखंतु various ट्रेड यूनियन माने विभिन्न पॉलिटिकल पार्टी के एफिलिएटेड हेगी रहले. So Congress has decided to have its own trade unions. So the foundations in the month of May 9 Trade Union Congress IEC was because of support of Congress. Congress AIT to follow out करिगला कम्युनिस्ट रेजिम को विशेष सपोर्ट देला नहीं तार निजर ट्रेड यूनियन आरंभ कला INTUC. In 1948, the unions under the influence of the Congress socialist came out of AITUC and formed the Hind Mazdoor Panchayat HMP. Simply out organization in 1949 United Trade Union Congress. So I8, HMS, AITUC, INTUC, HMS, then UTUC. There are various trade unions gradually coming up. So in the post-independent period, it shows the formation of Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, BMS, which was affiliated to Jansangh. It was formed in 1952. And in 1970, following a split in the Communist Party of India, AITC split leading to the formation of CITU-C2, Center of Indian Trade Union. Likewise, you must have heard about all these trade unions and all that, how they have been formed and they are affiliated to various political parties. So, by the mid of 1970s, there was a general feeling among different social groups that the country against the organized traditional political institutions and processes like political parties, organizations affiliated to them, like trade unions, elections, then professional political leaders. In 1982-83, the textile workers in Bombay were mobilized to strike, which is considered to have few parallels in the working class movement. Datta Samant was the president of the Maharashtra Ginni Kamagar Union, MGKU. He was able to mobilize a large section of the textile workers of Bombay. And the focus of mobilization of Datta Samant was mainly the economic issues. In 1974, the railway workers affiliated to the main trade union except the Congress affiliated to INTUC organized a nationwide strike, the railway strike. କାରଣ ଏଇ ସେଗମେଣ୍ଟ ଗୁଡାକରେ workers organization was very strong. Large number of workers are engaged in this. So the railway strike of 1974. So virtually it was a very massive strike, and the rails operation of rails came to a halt during the strike. And the government responded with a strong anti-worker stand and tried to break the strike. A few years after the strike, the Congress-led government imposed emergency during 1975-77. So, likewise, number of important trade unions they have come up in our country, both prior to independence and after independence. And these movements, working class movement, they are constrained by several factors. Rudolph, they argue that the organized working class forms a very small section of the working population of India. And therefore, there is no class politics in our country. Instead, Indian politics is a centrist politics. That is, of course, a version of criticism by Rudolph. The organized struggle of the working class resulted in the betterment of their condition, of course. The working class movement has given certain positive results. They resulted in the betterment of their conditions, both working and living condition. There are many problems with them, with these unions. They have their own internal problems. At various point of time, they have their splits and all that. And that is the, on certain fronts, they could not meet the expected results. And out of the main unions, several other unions, they have come up with their own ideology, with their own trend of activities and all that. But whatever it may be, the working class movement definitely has a very preponderant influence on Indian politics. Then we can think in terms of the Fisher-Fox movement. Very briefly, we will have to cover because only two important movements are left: Fisher-Fox movement and environmental movement. मत्स्यजीवी आंदोलन, Fisher-Fox, they constitute a large section of Indian population. The Fisher-Fox, they contributed largely to our economy, and mostly they live in the states of the coastal line. For example, in Odisha, there are a lot of fishermen. Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, West Bengal, Goa, Pondicherry, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Andaman Nicobar. These are the regions where the fishermen they reside. And you know, the division among the fishermen on religious and caste basis. There are also divisions on the basis of ownership of vessels, employment of labor, because all the fishermen are not poor. There are also rich fishermen. So among them there are various divisions. And many scholars, those who are working on this fishermen or fisher movement, they say that we can divide the fisher folks into three important groups. Fisher folks, those who own vessels and work with their families. ଯୋଉମାନଙ୍କର ନିଜର ଭେସଲ୍ସ ଅଛି, ଯୋଉମାନଙ୍କର ନିଜର ଛୋଟ ଛୋଟ ଜାହାଜ ଅଛି, ଯୋଉମାନେ ନିଜେ ମାଛ ମାରିବା ପାଇଁ ସମୁଦ୍ର ଭିତରକୁ ଯାଆନ୍ତି, they own their own vessels and work with their families. And those who own these and employ other fisher folks, କିଛି fisher folk ତାଙ୍କ ନିଜର ଭେସଲ୍ସ ଅଛି ଏବଂ ତାଙ୍କ ଫ୍ୟାମିଲି ସହିତ ସେମାନେ ଏନଗେଜ ହୁଅନ୍ତି। କିନ୍ତୁ ଆଉ କିଛି ଅଛନ୍ତି, those who own the vessels but they employ other fisher folks. Like, there are many film stars, politicians, wealthy persons, industrialists. ସେମାନେ ପାଖରେ ମାଛ ମରା ଜାହାଜ ଅଛି, କିନ୍ତୁ ସେମାନେ ନିଜେ ମାଛ ମାରିବାକୁ ଯାଆନ୍ତିନି, they employ other people. And the third category is those who do not own them but work on other vehicles. So these are the three groups which can be categorized. Fisher folks who own vessels and work with their families. Fisher folks, those who own them but employ other fisher folks, and those who do not own them but work on other vehicles. The fisher folk, they depend largely on other people also, like intermediaries who work as the agents of the traders, money lenders, and non-fisher folk owners of the trawlers and the big boats. ମାଛ ମାରିବା ପାଇଁ ଯୋଉ ଟ୍ରଲର ବା ବିగ్ ବୋଟ୍ ସବୁ ଆବଶ୍ୟକତା ହୁଏ, they are virtually and most often owned by the non-fisher folk people. So the fisher folk sometimes they have to depend on them, on the non-fisher folk, those who own the trawlers, and also they depend heavily on the money lenders. They also depend on the agents of the traders. One of the biggest problem for them is natural disaster. ଆପଣ ଦେଖିବେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ବାତ୍ୟା ଆସୁଛି, ବନ୍ୟା ଆସୁଛି, ଆପଣ ପାଣିପାଗ ଅଫିସର ପ୍ରଥମ ଚେତାବନୀ କାହାକୁ ଦିଆଯାଉଛି? ମତ୍ସ୍ୟଜୀବୀମାନଙ୍କୁ ବାରଣ କରାଯାଉଛି, ଡୋଣ୍ଟ ଗୋ ଟୁ ଦ ଡିପ୍ ସି ଫର ଫିଶିଂ. So they become the victims of the natural disaster. And these natural disasters affect the fisher folks the most. They are deprived of their houses. ଧର ସୁନାମି ଆସିଲା, ତାଙ୍କର ଘର ଭାଙ୍ଗିଗଲା, ତାଙ୍କ ଟ୍ରଲର ବୁଡିଗଲା, ବୋଟ୍ ଭାସିଗଲା. For example, the super cyclone in Odisha in 1990. ଆପଣ 1999 it has affected the fisher folks the most. Tsunami of December 2004. Likewise, you must be knowing that natural disaster ସବୁଠାରୁ worst victim ହଉଛନ୍ତି fisher. So the principal issues before this fisher can be like this: participation of the fisher folks in fisheries and fishery management, sale and processing of harvest products, opposition to the introduction of travelers, resource allocation and management of fisheries, providing boats, loans and grants, then rehabilitation in case of natural disaster. ତାଙ୍କ ଯଦି habitat ରୁ ସେମାନେ deprive ହେଇଗଲେ, ତାଙ୍କର ଘର ଦ୍ୱାର ଭାସିଗଲା, means of livelihood ରୁ ସେମାନେ deprive ହେଇଗଲେ, the first task is to re-establish them, rehabilitation. So these are some of the issues. So the issues of leadership and also various other problems faced by them, both during the normal times and also during the time of natural disaster. Those are to be. So far as leadership is concerned, it is observed that in South India, the leadership of the fisher folk is provided by the church fathers. nuns, intellectual academic activists, student social activists, professional social workers, community organizers, social and physical scientists. And many of them belong to the fisher communities. And they work in league with the NGOs concerned with the socio-economic and ecological issues. And a large number of leaders of the fisher folk, they are influenced by the ideology of liberation theology, which sought an alliance between Marxism and Christianity in order to liberate the mankind from miseries of life. In the field of fishermen movement, various the role of various organizations are also very much important. For example, in Kerala, there is Kerala Catholic Bishop Conference in Kottayam, Kutri, which belong to radical leadership, and also Akhil Kerala, Swatantra, Masya, Thachalai, that's a Kerala name, ASKMTF, the All Kerala Independent Fishermen Federation. The English version is All Kerala Independent Fishermen's Federation. And they have their various times they have their splits and all that. The split in ASKMTF, it has impacted the affairs of the church. So most of the times we find that the leadership is provided by in South India the church fathers. The first attempt to form fisher folks organization at the village, state and national level in India were made in 1960s and also 1970s. The earliest union was formed in 1963 in Quilon district in Kerala. And coastal state गुड़ाकरे देखिए fisher folk activities by एमानकर movement का बेसी preponderant because they live in those coastal districts for their livelihood and all that. The earliest union was formed in 1963 in Kerala. In other unions, they are also formed in Alleppey, Cochin, Trivandrum, and the Malabar districts. These are all the places of Kerala. And in Kerala, there is a direct linkage between the Roman Catholic Church and the leadership of these organizations. And these organizations, they mobilize the fisher folks into a movement. There are also fisher folk unions in other coastal states like Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal. But mostly in Kerala, the fisher folk movement was more active and assertive compared to the movements in other states. So, some of the examples of this collective actions of the fisher folks, you can find movement in Kerala, which we have just discussed in brief. The main demand of this fisher folk agitation was exclusive fishing zone for small scale fisher folks, total ban on the purse needs operation, other demands for greater welfare measures for the fish workers, and the movement met with the resistance of the lobbies of the investors, intermediaries, and the trawlers boat owners association. And one of the results of this movement was the passage of the Kerala Marine Fisheries Regulation Act in 1981. So how it has impacted also the policy making of the state. And this act was passed for regulating of the harvesting zones. Of course, all the problems of this fisher folk, they could not be solved by the legislative, administrative or political steps of the government. The movement in Kerala, that is, which was led by KS MTF, presented a semblance of communal harmony symbolized by the hunger strike of Hindu fishermen and Catholic non. There are also various events associated with this, which may not be touched upon in detail. But let us come to Odisha. There is also fisher folks movement in Chilka. You know, Tata House, who had tried to establish a prawn culture, and it's set to set up a large number of industrial scale semi-intensive shrimp culture, shrimp farming. Shrimp farming. And Tata's move was stopped midway as a result of the court injunction. And this court injunction came after the hard legal battle between the Tata House and the Fisher Park. Because the Fisher movement, it was being led by also Odisha Krishak Mahasangha. The leader also was Bankavihar Das as its president of Odisha Krishak Mahasangha. He had helped to organize the local fishing communities around Chilka Lake with the help of Mangrove Action Project. So in the Chilka region, the shrimp culture, the shrimp project by Tatas was actually stopped because of the court injunction as a result of heavy fisher folk agitation. So to sum up, fisher folks form a larger section of Indian population, especially in coastal states. They are subject to exploitation by the moneylenders, traders, big fish merchants, and also they are victims of natural disaster. And the leadership to this fisher folks, especially in Kerala, had largely been provided by the church fathers, nuns, social activists. And on several occasions, the fisher folk, they have resorted agitation, and the government responded mainly with the appointment of commission in several instances. Then last but not the least is environmental movement, which is very important. Ecological movement. Last but not the least, most important movement nowadays, the new social movement, Parivesh Andolana. Because environment constitutes the life support system. It constitutes the life support system. एपर्यंत पॉलिसी मेकिंग एक्टिविटीज रे जो प्रकार डेवलपमेंट पॉलिसी के हम परसू करूथिले डेवलपमेंट मॉडल को ग्रेजुअली थिंग्स हैव चेंज्ड ए टाइम हैज कम when the state policy is to be coupled with environmental policies for every project. Clearance from the, suppose one industry is to be set up, must be cleared by the State Pollution and Control Board. No project is allowed unless they take proper measures to control environmental pollution. So whenever there is a project, development project, we shall come to discuss about few instances. In that case, the people of the local area, affected people, they come up with revolt, rebellion, protest movements. While agrarian or working class movements have a long historical trajectory, environmental or ecological movement gained worldwide attention only in the second half of the 20th century. अन्य मूवमेंट गुड़ाक बहुत पुराना 19th century 18th century सब होइछ कि 20th century latter part रे केवल environmental movement gained importance and worldwide. Please remember, an environment got in the topic which is not confined to the national boundaries, because suppose a polluting industry of one country, the neighboring country, can pollute the atmosphere of neighboring countries. Political boundary आम environmental pollution को बंद कर पारिबानी, because atmosphere is one. Air pollution can spread, water pollution can spread. So environmental movements gathered importance only during the second half of 20th century. हमरो Brundtland Commission report हला sustainable development concept को accept करा गला. Must be knowing what is sustainable development. जे हमें गोटे development को जेतले pursue करछे project को, we must see that the needs of the present generation are fulfilled, but we cannot ignore the needs of the future generation. We cannot hamper their interest. So, in general, the environmental movements are grouped under tribal peasant movements and also under new social movements. This is so because ecological aspects are generally associated with peasants, with the tribals, and it is a movement which tries to protect the natural resources like forest, water. So in the whole of the world, ecological movement or environmental movement जार मुख्य उद्देश्य होची to protect the environment, परिवेश को संतुलन को रक्षा करिबा, पर्यावरण को सुरक्षित रखिबा. That was the main project, main target. So environmental movement in its broad generic term is generally used to describe and understand different types of local struggles, conflicts concerned with livelihood issues and ecology, life support systems are jadita, because we draw sustenance from nature. If we destroy nature, we are destroying ourselves. That will be suicidal. So unlike the West, significant characteristics of the environmental movement in our country, I mean in India, is that they have mainly involved the women, the poor, the disadvantaged masses who have been directly affected because of the environmental hazard. They have become the victims of that. So scholars like Gadgil and Guha, they have identified 4 broad strands within the environmental movement in India based on vision, ideology, and strategy. So, if we categorize the environmental movements in our country, the movements can be first and land-based. It can be marine resources and fisheries and aquaculture. This can be also the movement against industrial pollution, and also environmental movements can be against any development projects like dam or irrigation projects, power projects, mining, industrial plants, railway projects, military base. Then also environmental movement for the establishment of wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, and also the movement for appropriate technology and also organic farming. So these are various categories of the environmental movements, and various issues are also involved, like right of access to the forest resources, non-commercial use of natural resources, prevention of land degradation, social justice, human rights, protection of marine resources. Likewise, there are various issues involved in this. And also some examples also we can discuss, like Chipko, Apiko, tribal movements all over the country, National Fishermen's Forum working for the traditional fisher folk in Kerala, Chilka Bachao Andolan, and also Jan Andolan in Dabhol against the projects which are going to pollute atmosphere, pollute environment, anti-mine project in the Doon Valley, anti-bauxite mine movement in, there is Balco in so Gandhamardan. In our case in Odisha also there is Gandhamardan Surakya or Banchao Andolan. Likewise, there are many instances which can be also in ourselves we can have. So environmental movement is mostly a movement for protecting environment, which gives us the life sustenance system of life support system. जो थे का हम life depend करूँ. Some mentions, some popular movements we can discuss because the time is very shortly. You know, Chico movement, for example, in 1970s. Chipko movement was launched in the Himalayan forest. Chipko meant to hog the trees. And you know, there are leaders like Sundarlal Baguna, Chandi Prasad Bhatt, those are associated with this Chipko Andolan. हमें कहूँ हिंदी में चिपक जाएंगे to hug. Chipko means that is when forest contractors they have come to cut the trees. The people of that area they have hugged the tree. That you first you cannot cut the trees. They try to protect the trees by hugging. And you know, a lot of women they have come active in this particular development. In early 1973, Forest Department refused to alert ash trees to the Dasuli Gram Swarajya Sangh, a local cooperative organization based in the Chamoli districts for making agricultural implements. On the other hand, the Forest Department allotted the ash trees to private companies. Hence, the local organizations they have come up against this type of policy of the government. So the demand of the Chipko movement in the Himalayan region was complete stoppage of cutting trees for commercial purposes. The traditional rights should be recognized on the basis of minimum needs of the people, making the arid forest green by increasing people's participation in tree cultivation, then also give them the people share in the forest management, That formation of the village committees to manage their own forest. Giving priority to afforestation in the light of local conditions and requirements. These are the most important demands of this movement. Then another important movement we can have Apico movement. Apico movement was a movement in Western Ghat in South, in Uttar Kannada region of Karnataka. It was, they have been inspired by the Sitco movement of Himalayan region. It was in 1983. The same is almost destruction of the forest. It was caused because of the commercial felling of the trees. In September 1983, women and youth of that particular region, that is in Western Ghat, in Uttarakhand, decided to launch a movement similar to that of Chitko in South India. Women and youth, they have participated vigorously in this movement, environmental movement. The agitation continued for 38 days. And this forced the state government to finally concede to the demands and withdraw the order of the felling of the trees. So, in fact, Apico movement also became a symbol of the people's power for the right of the natural resources. They come to have the state power versus the right. People's right to the natural resources. It was established. Another important environmental movement is Narmada Bachao. You must have heard about the leader Medha Patkar, who is associated with this. Because in Gujarat, this was a movement against Sardar Sarovar project. The Narmada Valley project, with its two mega projects, Sardar Sarovar project and Narmada Sagar project in Madhya Pradesh, is the largest single river valley project with the objective of making the world's largest man-made lake. And the consequence of this project was glaring, alarming. Because when that dam shall be established, it shall submerge underwater 37,000 hectares of land and 11,000 hectares are classified as forests. And displacement. It will also displace about 1 lakh person of 248 villages. Even any dam project, think of Hirakud Dam also, when it was built, many areas were submerged and also many people displaced. So that led to displacement problem, and also there is protest movement for rehabilitation. So in case of the Sardar project also, Sardar Sarovar project, the state government initiated the project as Gujarat was one of the most water-starved regions in India. And also there is drastic shortage of water for domestic and commercial purpose. So this Narmada Bachao Andolan was in protest of this project. In 1988, this Narmada Bachao Andolan, it demanded formally the stoppage of all works of Narmada Valley Development Project. And the protesters they describe it as a destructive project. So finally the movement became more or less successful. The achievements of this movement include exit of the World Bank from Sardar Sarovar in 1993. World Bank has withdrawn. Halt of Sardar Sarovar construction in 1994 to 99. Then withdrawal of foreign investors from Maheshwar Dam. So these are few important movements. In Chilka Pancha Andolan, which is the Fisher, we have discussed under Fisher Fox movement, was also one of the movements to conserve wetland. Chilka Pancha Andolan. So we shall find Save Chilka movement also can be termed as an environmental movement of Odisha. That is to save the largest brackish water lake of Asia, that is Chilka. How to save it, how to protect it. Besides, also throughout the country, there are many urban-based environmental movements. It may be protest movements. You must be knowing that the great protest movement against this Bhopal gas tragedy. So any air pollution, water pollution, industrialization, or the associated evils of this process, they have been protested by the activists. And many volunteer agencies and social activist groups, they are involved in this environmental movement. Civil society organizations. That is why this is categorized as a new social movement. And also in most cases, on public demand, after a lot of pressure from the public, government has taken up many policies to protect the environment. For example, the Air Act of 1981. And also, in the legal platform, also a lot of public interest litigations, PILs, they have come up to protect the environment or to establish the people's right on natural resources. So PILs or public interest litigations, they have become effective weapons through which people seek the interventions of the state on these issues. So judiciary also has intervened in many cases to protect the environment. So since 1970s, not only throughout the world, but also in India, environmental and ecological movements, they have become very prominent because environmental issues are both urban based and also rural based. And issues related to the people's dignity, environmental rights, the decision making rights. And these movements also try to demand for a platform where people can be associated with the policy making activity. You know, that is most important. So environmental movement, which is a new social movement, and more or less it is one of the latest movements throughout the world, would provide a platform for the people to participate in the decision making procedure. So now any development project must be ecologically sound. So proper ecological measures must be taken up by any project authorities so that environment must be protected or least injury must be done to the environment so that sustainable development is now the goal. Any state, maybe developing state or developed state, their objective is sustainable development. Sustainable development definition ଆପଣମାନେ ଜାଣିଛନ୍ତି ଯୋଉଟା କି ବ୍ରୁଟଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡ କମିଶନ ଡିଫାଇନ୍ କରିଛି ଯେ ପ୍ରେଜେଣ୍ଟ ଡେ ଜେନେରେସନ ତାର ମେମ୍ବର୍ସ ମାନେ ତାଙ୍କର ନିଡ୍ ଟା ଫୁଲଫିଲ୍ କରିବା ସହିତ ଫ୍ୟୁଚର ଜେନେରେସନର ନିଡ୍ କୁ ମଧ୍ୟ ଦୃଷ୍ଟିରେ ରଖିବେ. They cannot interfere or they cannot ignore the rights of the future generation from enjoying the natural resources. So that must be protected and so on. So I think another 15-20 minutes left. We should sum up the whole text. And social movements, it may be Dalit movement, OBC's movement, women movement, ethnic movement, environmental movement, or fisher fucks movement, doesn't matter. But they must be assessed in the context of democracy. So now, in this final chapter, we shall discuss its relationship, relationship of various environment, various social movements to the democracy. And we will have to assess the role of and the significance of the social movements in the democratic political system. You know what is democracy? प्रथमे democracy everybody knows about that it means, which comes from a Greek word demos, means the people, and kratos means power, authority. So democracy is based on authority of the people. Very simple. आमे जदि etymologically word टाको analyze करिबा, democracy means people's authority, people's power. So we can say it's a government of the people, by people, for the people, and it means it's a system where people can change their rulers, and government is given the right to rule because the people say that it can rule. So government rules because of the people's consent. Democracy अर्थ से है. आम ऊपर सरकार आम पे निष्पत्ति होचंती because it is people's consent. People have said that yes, this is our government and they can take a policy for our benefit. And government which is conducted with the free given consent of the people. A system of government in which supreme authority lies with the people, ruled by the people in a country, directly or representatively. Direct democracy, also representative democracy. A large country like India, any other country, most of countries in the world now, they have a representative form of democracy. Direct democracy, ancient Greece possible thila. Or in present day, we can cite the example of Switzerland and some of as a country of direct democracy. But most of the countries, they have a representative form of democracy through election. We send our representatives, those who participate in governance. So, democracy has essentially three important ingredients. They are political institutions, political process, and substantial functioning. In democratic system, political institutions such as electoral system, legislature, they provide the scope and necessary mechanism to the citizens to participate directly or indirectly in decision making. MPs, MLAs मानकु आमे election through रे parliament by assembly मानकु पठे दे, and they participate on our behalf in the policy making or in the decision making. So when the citizens are not satisfied with the function of their representatives, decisions or use of power, people may change them. So there is the provision of periodic elections. So there is the provision of periodic election. प्रत्येक 5 वर्ष में election होची. If we are not satisfied with the particular government, we can overthrow them. So democracy without politics is a body without soul. So democracy also is a part of politics. And what is politics? It means conflict and struggle of interest and ideology. There are society, democratic society, there shall be the presence of various interests, various ideologies, and all the ideologies must be given their due. So politics is concerned with what? The control of the resources, the use of the resources, the distribution of resources. So objectives of the political institution are to cater to the needs and aspirations of the people. It should function and aim at development of all. Democracy like a ନିର୍ଦ୍ଦିଷ୍ଟ group by a small group or only the few citizens should not be benefited. The policies must be made to benefit all. So in that sense, democratic system in developing societies in the third world is a process of social transformation so that all citizens can participate in the system and with equal capacity. There is no discrimination. But democracy also has its own limitations, has its own constraints. You know, institutions are mechanisms to attain certain objectives. Their structures in terms of composition of membership, organizational system, locating power, responsibilities, duties, control over resources, procedures for functioning to take decisions, and carrying out the responsibilities. They are formed in context of time and objective. Institutions are definitely important, but not always enough in attaining substantial aspects of politics. They provide limited choice to the people. Social movements build pressures on policymakers. How we can relate social movements with the democratic processes. Social movements are task to build pressures on policymakers for reforming the institutions, create new institutions, keep check on the abuse of power, and demonstrate the needs and expectations of people. So social movements provide the scope and avenue for social transformation, and that is the objective of democracy. I mean, jete social movement usra padhili. What is the main purpose? The movement builds up a pressure on policymakers. Suppose Dalit movement creates a pressure on the policymakers so that betterment of the Dalits can be provided. Environmental movement pressurizes the policymakers or the government mechanism to make policies which are environmentally sustainable, which is eco-friendly. Kisar movement, through the movement, social movement, they try to build up pressure on the policymakers or on the government to take up necessary measures to protect the interest of the fisher world. So, public protests have a certain functional utility, even in a parliamentary form of democracy. And social movement the policymakers or the rulers, they are on toes. They are always alert. They are vigilant. And the social movements, they provide safety valves where people express their grievances. So many scholars like Edward Seal, Robert Nesbitt, William Knauser, they argue that democratic system has evolved various institutions to manage societal affairs on behalf of the people. And the system provides opportunities to express their desires, grievances, and problems to their representatives through periodic elections. But these scholars also have pointed out that direct collective action in the form of mass movement sometimes is anti-democratic. You see, their analysis is sometimes this mass movements may, by nature, be, it, it may be anti-democratic. Such movements bring unnecessary pressure on the elected representatives and hamper efficient functioning of the political institutions. तो बेले बेले मास मूवमेंट गुड़ाक मध्य इमती भाव अंड्यू भाव प्रेसराइज करती जोटा कि पॉलिटिकल इंस्टीट्यूशन फंक्शनिंग रे बाधा सृष्टि करे. So the government is often pulled in different directions and sometimes they are pressurized to take decisions under pressure, not on merit. So this is one of the adverse impacts of sometimes the mass movements. Then we can throw some light on democracy and social transformation in our country, in India. You know, traditionally speaking, our Indian society is hierarchical. Brahminical framework of social order has been gradually in the process of democracy delegitimized. The influence of the Brahminical system has diminished. Rule of law has come up. Equal citizenship, social and economic equality. They have been codified in legal systems. One of the most striking and positive contribution of the system is that people from lower strata, they participate in electoral process and exercise their franchise. That means even a person who is residing in the lowest bottom of the society also participates in decision making through election. He has the right to vote. And through their votes, they often throw out from power one set of political leaders if they are dissatisfied and bring new leadership to come in with the hope that they can give some better framework, better system for them. Democratic system also in our country has created various institutions. Legal mechanisms provide freedom to express opposite views, expose misdeeds of the rulers, and pressures on the state are built for accountability of their action. Legal provisions, institutional mechanisms, they can be subjected to distortion and can be also used to subvert democratic space. Sometimes they can be misused also, which can act against the democratic spirit. Some analysts they say that institutional ethics and mechanism are increasingly getting eroded for personal power and interests. And democracy has become a game of the few, irrespective of caste, gender, and religion, who could manipulate muscle and money power to perpetuate their own personal interest. So, common man is coming across so much of events in the society where the people in the power, those who have been returned to power through democratic process of election, they are misusing power to meet their own personal interest. Examples are many. So, in the midst of certain improvements in certain social service and sectors, there are also some disturbing reversals. Infant mortality rate, it has almost stagnated in the last decade. The nutrition level and calorie intake of the poor, it has declined. Almost 12 million people suffer from vitamin A deficiency. This is all some data only gathered. The practice of dowry has increased in various social groups where it never existed in the past. Similarly, similarly we shall find that atrocities against the Dalits, tribals, women, minorities, it has increased. I mean, in spite of the democratic measures, in spite of all the sound and healthy democratic systems, the social evil social practices also they have increased. This is a database given by some organizations, survey organizations. So there is also rising expectation, and side by side also there is frustration. Number and coverage of social movements they have come up. I mean, देखिए gradually social movement number बहुत बढ़ जाइए, and they have increased in the society, including the democratic system. And this is primarily because of the rising aspiration of the people, and because also of the frustration of the people. They are taking recourse to protest movements. ସେମାନେ ଯାହା ଏକ୍ସପେକ୍ଟ କରୁଥିଲେ ଡେମୋକ୍ରାଟିକ ସିଷ୍ଟମରୁ ସେଟା ସେମାନେ ପାଇନାହାନ୍ତି, and that is the reason that why they have gone for protest movements. So there is increase in the number of protest movements in the society. Many scholars like Huntington, Rajani Kothari, they have observed that the gap between the expectation of the people and performance of the system, it has widened. And that is why mass upsurge in the forms of movement increases. जो समय expectation ଆଉ performance of the system लोक जहाँ government ରୁ ବା ଗୋଟେ system ରୁ ଚାହୁଁଛନ୍ତି ପାଉନାହାନ୍ତି. So there is a gap, wide gap between the expectations of people and the system. It has really led to the upsurge of social movements in the society. So scholars like Rajani Kothari, they believe that democracy in India has become a playground for growing corruption, criminalization, repression, and intimidation of large masses of the people. There is discontent and despair in the air, still highly diffused, fragmented, and unorganized. But there is a growing awareness of rights held politically and expressed politically, and by and large, still almost at this stage. So, electoral system, political parties, and established trade unions, they do not provide space to the masses to bring social transformations. And in their place, there is emerging a new area of counteraction, of the countervailing tendencies, of the countercultural movements, and more generally, of a counter challenge to the existing paradigms of thought and action. This is a version. an observation of the scholars like Rajni Kotla. But definitely, we can conclude with the say some of the observations. As Rajani Kothari doesn't he could not justify all types of direct action. He said that the action is desired only if the political change desired by the group involved in direct action offers a greater scope of political freedom than is offered by the existing political arrangement. So let us conclude this chapter on social movement and politics in India by saying that democracy and social movements are closely linked like two sides of the same coin. Because social movements are the expression of the collective will. It is the soul of democracy, expression of the people's grievance against the system, the needs and aspirations. So, the nature of the social movements, in terms of their goals, ideologies, organizational structures, and programs, they play a very important role in strengthening or otherwise of democracy. So, this is how we can have a conclusion to this chapter on democracy and social movements and their relationship and all that. Okay, this is already 7 p.m. So I declare that all these chapters I have touched upon in the briefly, and I thank you all for your patient listening. So today we have finished this subject, that is social movements and politics in India. Thank you for the patient listening. Hello, friends. Hello.
Hello, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much for the
Thank you, sir.
patient listening. Okay.
you, sir.
Wish you all best.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Wish you all best of luck. Thank you.